title of my version of Poor Theory, in the spirit of the Poor Theory manifesto, and especially of what Akbar called making the most of limited resources. Did you want to translate?
I think they all speak
Oh,
English.
so we don't need if anybody needs translation, you say. Okay. Chen Danqing is a painter who has extensively and lucidly commented on his own art. One could almost say that his art and his own critical commentary function according to a logic of supplementarity, because the comments constantly expand on the artwork itself. And I will start with one of his statements. This is a quote: "I believe that perplexity is a necessary stage in our social development." I see what Danqing calls perplexity as linked to the use of what the manifesto of Poor Theory calls fascination as a critical method. But perplexity, in a way, precedes fascination in the sense that it is a state we experience when our preconceived theoretical categories seem to fail. Danqing links perplexity to a time, quote, in which people are lost and values are lost. I would like to also link it to a transitional time in which people experience perplexity in the face of the emergence of new states of things and new states of beings, or new forms of subjectivity and conviviality. And we have talked a lot about these, and we have brought a lot of the examples in the last few days. In a way, I just want to make some links and draw some of our own discussion into the debate today. If we think in Foucauldian terms, we could say that we are experiencing an epistemological break or rupture of unprecedented proportions. And unprecedented, I mean mainly because of the breathtaking speed of some of the collapses, financial, economical, relational, that necessitates profound transformations. But I also think this speed manifests itself in some of the speed in which we see cultural productions. And when we went to the art district in Shanghai, I couldn't get rid of the impression that a lot of the artwork was produced with breathtaking speed, in a way, with not much time put in. And this is almost a complete contrast to what we could see in Lu Dan's work or in Chen Danqing's work itself. And later we'll see more in detail some of the paintings. Now theory, critical theory, is faced with the challenge of approaching this new episteme from a perspective that acknowledges, as it says in the manifesto, that we do not know yet what it is, a perspective in a way of radical uncertainty. And I think this is what, something, or I hope I understand it right, that this is something that Akbar has in mind when he says we need a cultural arbitrage that draws on all resources at hand. Now let me address Chen Danqing's work more specifically in light of these remarks. Why, we could ask, is Danqing so preoccupied, if not obsessed with copying and replication at this point in time? And for those of you who haven't seen the work yet, a lot of it is repainting, replications of older paintings, classical Chinese, but also Russian paintings, Western paintings, French paintings, Baroque paintings, and so on. So why this preoccupation with copying and replication in this cultural context? Why does he focus his work on painting from other painting, as he says, both classical Chinese and Western? Or perhaps we could put it even in Derridian terms, why does Danqing submit himself to such an archive fever? That we could say that his work emerges in the shadow of an archive. And how is his use of the archive linked to cultural memory and artistic memory? And I think it's no coincidence that with all the work we have seen, cultural memory and different ways and techniques and art forms of using and linking to cultural memory are very central. And in Danqing's work, we see a very different form of using cultural memories than we saw in Ning Ying's work or in Lu Dan's and Lu Sola's work. We have seen that Danqing does not just copy classical art, but makes copies of copies we find in art books. This is some of the newer work after the Tiananmen work. This is already, in a way, a meta-statement, not only on the work of art in the age of cultural reproduction, but also on art books as framing devices for the purpose of reframing memories as well as layered recontextualizations facilitated by books. I mean, if you, those of you who haven't seen it yet, we have paintings where classical Chinese paintings are not copied from the original, but copied from their replications in art books, and then the art books are copied, the frames of the art books are copied. So we have layered recontextualizations. And perhaps I want to add one more thought on layered recontextualizations, which I consider one of Danqing's main techniques. And I would like to draw out, and perhaps we could do this in the discussion, the relationship of these layered recontextualizations to cultural memory. Danqing makes use of his own memory and his personal archive as a tool for I would call them really free associations that guide him in the composition of his work. And this is an interesting contrast, I think. Danqing, I of course didn't know what he would talk about today. He talked so much about being designed by many things, but what I really see is a certain freedom that flows from memory to memory in very associative and analogical ways. And there the design comes in crafting them together, in putting different memory spaces together. I give a few examples. He focuses on analogs between certain body postures or facial expressions, and these become linkages across very diverse traditions. So, for example, distorted crying bodies from TV representations of the Tiananmen Square events are suddenly linked in memory to a flamenco dancer's expressions in a certain posture. And what happens, I think the interesting thing is what happens if these spaces are brought together. It's a personal linkage of memories through viewing of analogies, but I'm also interested in perhaps talking about how does that affect the viewers and how are we pulled into that space and how do we relate to that space. Fragmented pieces of classical sculpture become linked to fragmented bodies in contemporary scenes of violence. Or classical nude paintings are juxtaposed to a nude on Playboy magazine. Commercial objects and painted dollar bills on repainted classical art evoke design's use of the memory of art and the kinship of art, commerce, prostitution, and what Akbar called the erotics of disappointment. And indeed, I also think all these spaces become spaces of dislocation and relocation. And perhaps I end, especially given the time, I end with a few thoughts on inter-artistic or intertextual memories within Danqing's own work. Now, those familiar with his work cannot but remember the earlier work when we see the later work. So we remember the earlier work, its traces, or even the erasure of its traces, or even the silences of its traces in the new work. So I think, for example, when I look at the repaintings of classical paintings as they appear in book forms and the layered books, then I also have memories and bring to this experience memories of the Tibetan series, but also memories of the diptychs and the triptychs of the Tiananmen Square series. And this is, I think, how the diptychs, triptychs, and also the repaintings more generally become vehicles for displacing and replacing memories. And Akbar, in his preface, has pointed out and emphasized how psychic dislocations are always paralleled with geographic dislocations. And today, Danqing talked about visual dislocations. So I think we also have layered dislocations. And these become a form of designing history or designing history. I also see them as vehicles of what Michael Rosberg called multi-directional memory. It's a memory that does not focus on one historical time, but a memory that pulls different historical times together and especially pulls also different violent histories together and recontextualizes them and reinterprets them in a new light. I actually myself sometimes think of them as condensed memories because there's also something at work like the condensation of a dream space. Danqing traces memory where it is locked in images, and it is precisely the juxtaposition of images that follows an unconscious scanning of analogies that unlocks the images and brings them to life again. Let me end here and ask Chen Danqing perhaps to establish some links for us between the different phases of his work. And perhaps you could make some comments on the work that you are producing today and that you are doing today in relation to what it can tell us about our place in this episteme, in this time in which we don't quite know yet what the design actually is. Over to Danqing for his comments. I asked him at the end to see whether he could perhaps establish some links for us between the different phases of his work and make some comments perhaps on his new work, the work he's doing right now, but also the new work he has done since his return, his move back from the US to China. And perhaps also speculate a little bit about the place of his work in relation to this epistemological rupture or break in which we are, all the changes that are happening now, which we can't quite define yet.
Okay, thank you. 我想，我的道路有3个阶段，一个阶段是从14、15岁开始学油画，到28岁去美国，这个阶段我非常向往苏联的艺术和欧洲的艺术，然后第2个阶段是从28、29岁一直到46、47岁这样，我待在纽约，眼界打开，我到了我年轻时候向往的一个西方文化当中。然后从47岁到现在9年过去了，我回到中国，我发现非常奇怪的是，第一，我不知道在画什么不知道在画什么，第二，我改变了年轻时候的一个向往，就是我忽然非常想回到我年轻时候的状态，那个状态就是当时的意识形态要求我们去做的，就回到农村去，到人民当中去。我几天前我还在西北的一个小村子里面，像我30年前在农村那样，在画农民。我不知道为什么是这样，因为我一直在寻找一种或者遭遇一种错位的状态。就我在农村的时候，一天到晚向往欧洲，我把西藏当成苏联，当成法国。可是我从美国回来以后，我又一直想回到我年轻时候的状态。这是非常 confused 的一个状况。
If arbitrarily I could put my creative work into 3 phases, the first one would start from when I was 14 or 15 years old, when I was just starting to learn to paint, up until when I was 28, before I moved to the United States. I was really quite influenced by the Soviet Union art. And the second phase would be when I was around 28, when I went to New York, up until when I was around 46 years old. I stayed in the US, and really it was a very eye-opening experience learning about all this Western art, etc. And the third phase, I would say, is after I returned to China until now. What I realize is I don't know what to paint anymore. And I'm constantly going through these changes that I'm longing to go back to my young ages, to go into the countryside, to be with the people. And just a few days ago, I was in northwestern China in a small village. So I'm wondering why I'm constantly having this sense of dislocation. When I was in Tibet, I was longing for the European or Soviet Union, and now I'm really longing to go back to my younger ages.
大约就是这样啊。这些年我做了另外一件事情，就是开始大量的写文章，而且出书。因为我回来以后遭遇了一个跟我走以前非常不同的一个中国，尤其是我在大学里教书，我非常厌恶目前的一个教育制度，啊，这个由此引发到就是媒体开始持续的来找我。这个时候我就被带到另外一个空间里去，就老是在那儿写作说话。我想这可能有点因为我自己绘画上的危机，我真的不知道画什么。我刚才已经说过了，就是在两端我都是做的是政治上不正确的事情，可是我仍然还是要找自己觉得对的事情。到目前我还没有找到，所以我主要的精力还是在写作。然后在绘画变成我一个非常非常私人的怀旧的一件事情，业余的画一画，就我也不知道下一步怎么走法。
Another thing that has happened in my life is after I returned to China, I started doing a lot of writing and publishing, because when I came back, I'm looking at a completely different China. I was teaching in the university, and I really did not like the system. And media got interested in me, and there was a lot of talk with the media. So I entered a different space, the space of writing and speaking. The reason that's happening, I think, is because I've entered a state of crisis in terms of painting. As I said earlier, I've always been politically incorrect, both in China and in the US. But however, I really need to find the right things to do. So currently, I'm still doing a lot of writing, and painting has become a very private, very, very personal thing to me.
Just, yeah. That's it.
Perhaps I can ask one specific question in relation to the dislocation and then open it to the floor for discussion. You emphasize so much the constant dislocation in your work, but then formally, if we look at the work, I also find interesting that you bring locations together. You bring very different locations together in juxtapositions in the diptychs and triptychs especially, but you do not merge them. So it's in a way the break between them, or the page break, even the page
because
break.
most interesting me is a dislocation.
Yeah, but the page break remains intact, so that we as spectators or viewers have to almost fill in or negotiate the space between.
Right.
And I wonder how you see your bringing the locations together. What kind of intervention that is for you?
我想我还是要找一个小的理由，比方说三幅完全不同的画在一起，我会找一个肢体上的或者动作上的相似性，然后有了这个相似性，我就可以开始攻击外界。就是我想强调这个世界怎样的没有沟通，也不可能沟通，这种相似性只是为了强调这种不可沟通，这种错位，不知道我做到没有
？In this kind of in my work with putting all the locations together, or the juxtaposition of spaces, I'm also always finding a small reason to put them together. It could be a small gesture or anything. By finding this similarity, I'm really intervening by saying by showing the impossibility of communication.
Okay, I think at this point it's best to open it to your questions.
I was wondering what made you go to Tibet, because I'm looking at your Tibetan paintings and it's really interesting. Was it just by chance that you went to Tibet? I ask you this because this morning we were discussing Chinese civilization as distinct from Chinese nation state. And that made me think about the very idea of Chinese civilization often being coterminous with a Han civilization. So I was wondering, for instance, what is the place of non-Han minorities within the designing or counter-designing of China?
Okay. 我第一次去西藏是非常偶然的，在文化大革命当中，我还是农村的一个知青，但是有一位女大学生毕业以后志愿要求去西藏服务，这个人后来变成我的太太，她发现西藏很少有专业的画家，她认为我画的不错，在当时，所以就把我借到西藏去。这样我在西藏期间就变成一个职业的画家，带了一点学生，这是第一次，这1976年。第二次是我已经在北京念书，我选择再到西藏去。那时候我已经我已经结婚了，我太太仍然在西藏工作，所以我就又去了一次啊。但这去的当中相隔4年，这西藏变成两个情况，一个是文革时期，一个是改革开放初期。这是第一个问题啊。
Actually, I went to Tibet for the first time by accident. There was a young university student, a young woman who volunteered to work in Tibet, and this lady later became my wife. And she thought there were very few artists doing anything about Tibet, so I was borrowed to Tibet as a student, and went there, and I taught some students and did some work. That was in '76, and later, 4 years later, and by that time I was still married and she was still working in Tibet. I went back, but Tibet was in a different phase, because the first time I went there, Tibet was still in the middle of Cultural Revolution, and the second time it was just a beginning state of China's reform and opening up. That's the first part of your question.
然后这个西藏包括新疆、内蒙，在中国的现代绘画，也就是过去70、80年的现代绘画中，有一个非常奇怪的现象，就是这个可能跟油画从西方进来有关系。就西方这一套系统进入中国以后，可能不是那么容易用西方的油画语言去画汉族人的形象，所以从20年代开始，上个世纪，一直到现在，很多汉族的画家都喜欢到西藏、新疆、内蒙和云南，去画那些少数民族。这个经常遭到批评，说这是一种异国情调。我觉得这个批评有道理的，因为我实际上很不了解西藏，我也不是佛教徒，现在想起来，我头2次去西藏，就完全把它当成假想成一个是俄罗斯，一个是法国，因为在汉族地区我看到的人，当时你们也看到，就是毛时代的中国人都穿着中山装，非常 boring， 这个不适合画油画。到了西藏，我忽然发现我可以把他们想象成苏联人或者是法国人来画。所以这是一种误会，一种误读。
There's still a common thinking that, especially in the 70s and the 80s, that Tibet and Xinjiang and Inner Mongolia and these places, there's this something very strange, because oil painting came from the Western world, and people don't think it's easy to paint Han people. That's why many people still think it's easier to to represent the Tibetans, the Xinjiang people, Inner Mongolia, or Yunnan, all the ethnic minorities. And this thinking has been criticized as being very overly driven by this exoticism. Because when I went to Tibet, I knew nothing about Tibet or Buddhism. I just regarded this place as Russia or France, because as you know, in the Mao times, everybody was in a Mao outfit, and it was totally boring. So I thought Tibet was easier for me to create a visionary world of France or Russia or the Soviet Union.
所以我想你喜欢的某一种文明或者艺术，它会真的是会设计你，甚至决定你。我生长在上海，同时我在纽约度过了将近20年，这两个地方是我住的最长的城市。可是我一辈子从来没有画过上海，也没有画过纽约。
So I think the civilization or art that you are interested in can really shape or rather design you, because I was born and raised in Shanghai and I lived for 20 years in New York, but I never did anything about them in my paintings.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the discussion. I'm not sure if I will try to make this question clear. I've not fully worked it out yet, but you mentioned before the generation of the 80s and 90s and 70s, and I've encountered it myself as people brought it up to me as like, you know, that there are quite different engagements with political discourse and media across these different generations. And then you also mentioned the infiltration of various people with the party and the government. So you mentioned this one particular example, the fashion woman, you know, with the fancy makeup, being a member of the party. And so I was particularly interested in sort of the different generations and their relationship to the party or to political discourse. If you could maybe talk about that more, if you can, I don't know. And also how that might differ in terms of like the media usage, or how they engage with political discourse differently. If you see, for example, between your generation and let's say the 90s, is there a difference in terms of, you know, how they express political engagement through their media use?
Yeah. Okay. Very good question. Yeah. Oh, okay. 我相信有3代共产党。第一代共产党就是1949年以前，那非常让人尊敬的一个党文化，就是所有入党的人第一件要准备的事情就是死掉，要牺牲。然后第2代党员也非常让人尊敬，就是1949年到1979年左右，这样的党员就是他不一定会死掉，但是他已经拿到政权了，但是他必须奉献，必须服务，然后就是第3代，我回头再说。
Basically, I think there are 3 generations of party members. The first generation, I respect them a lot, are they joined, it is the pre-1949 generation, before the People's Republic was established. And when they joined the party, I think they were prepared to die for what they believed in. The second generation would be from 1949 to 79. Of course, the party already has power, but they were ready to serve, to dedicate themselves to the course of constructing the country. And I do have respect for them as well.
我可以举个例子给你，就是我太太家里面，她的父亲是解放前的共产党，然后他做了军人，跟日本人打仗， 他完全可以死掉的，很幸运他没有死。但是他的父亲的哥哥也参加了共产党，但是被认为脱派，被共产党枪毙啊，可是他唱着歌去枪毙，因为他们入党的时候都准备好会被枪毙。太多共产党员在49年以前被枪毙啊，这个是他父辈的情况。那么到了我们这代人入党是非常难的一件事情，他要考验你能够吃多大的苦。我的太太在1976年入党，就在我去西藏的那一年，因为她的代价是她放弃在城市里的生活，到西藏去。那个时候西藏完全像中世纪一样，她可以1年连蔬菜都没有。非常非常苦的生活，但是他非常快乐，就是完全理想主义这样的。
I could give an example about my wife's family. Her father was in the army, fought the Japanese. He was a party member. He could have died, but luckily he did not. But her father's brother was shot to death because of some inner political struggles within the party, and he was singing the revolutionary songs when he was dying. My wife, she joined the party in 1976, and at that time it was very difficult to join the party. Because there was a lot of testing on, if you really you can make a good communist. And what she had to give up was the comfort of urban life in exchange for the hardship in Tibet, which was like the Middle Ages. And I want to give an example of how hard it gets, because sometimes it's for a whole year she would not get any vegetable at all.
所以到了改革开放以来这30年，党文化发生很大的变化，因为国家变化了，危险没有了，艰苦也慢慢没有了，所以这个时候大家有吃有穿，可是这个政府最重要的就是这个政权靠党员能够有一个很强的政治力量能够维持下去。那这个第一个问题就是你要吸收年轻的党员，而这个时候，中国的社会也在发生变化，就是大家都抛弃理想主义，尤其是64以后，我相信，64最大的变化就是让所有政府的人和老百姓不再相信这件事情，但是大家这个面子要过下去，所以这个时候，无论是党和底下的青年，他们必须找到一个非常现实的办法。就是党必须让越来越多的年轻人进来啊，年轻人也知道，入党是一件现实的事情啊，它跟理想、跟奉献、跟牺牲都没有关系，但它跟利益有关系。党要在年轻人身上找到政权的利益，然后年轻人也要在党身上找到现实生活的利益。我刚才说了，他的前途会好得多，所以它是某种程度的和解和一种这个默契。就是非常好的一种彼此利用的关系。然后你不要来反党，我们都是一条船上，我们把这个戏唱下去啊，就是这样。
Since the reform and opening up for the past 30 years, a lot of the changes have happened in the country, and accordingly within the party. There's no longer any danger or risk or hardship. The challenge for the party is really to maintaining its power, and thus comes the need to get the young members into the party. Because since the June 4th incident, a lot has changed within China. The biggest change would be the loss of idealism. And the government and people do not any longer believe in these idealistic things, but life goes on and you still need to keep faith. So the reality is the young people and the party have this common, they both have their own interest, and now we see a good integration of the interest, which comes down to a reconciliation and a common understanding between the party and the young people, because they both get something out of this relationship. So the party would be saying, there's no need for you to go against me. We're all in the same boat together, and we need to keep this show going.
我刚才说的那个很美丽的模特儿，她入党的原因，我相信就是她知道模特儿是青春饭，过了几年就下面更年轻的人上来了，所以她同时还在念大学。可是你只要在大学里面，如果你是党员，你的出路真的会好得多。你到一些你想去的地方，你会被优先考虑啊。而且事实上，我接触过的党员都是特别聪明能干的人，特别理性的人啊。这个跟政治立场已经不太有关系了，就大家是在现实层面上的一种合作啊。
The fashion model I mentioned earlier, she knew very well that being a fashion model, you only can work in this business for a few years while you're young. When you get older, a young generation comes up and you're useless. So she's currently a party member. She's going to the university, and she knows really well that being a party member, she will have a much better future. And it is true that I have seen many examples that party members are given preferential treatment in education and job placement, and it has nothing to do with their political stance. And many of these young party members are very smart, capable, and very rational in knowing what they're doing.
Thank you.
好，那我先说中文了。那个，如果我刚刚没听错的话，您是说，您如果早点知道那个穷理论的话，您会更加猖狂一些，是吗？
对，因为我相信我和刘丹和索拉，我们都会明白，就是我们一个人在纽约做这些事情的时候，我们其实在纽约的机会是很有限的。人会觉得孤单，而且有时候不太确定我这样做对不对，因为我相信穷理论给了我一个支持，就是也证实了我早先的一个直觉，就是如果按照现有的理论框架，我们做的事情都不对的，不太会有结果的，但是我又非常强烈的想要做一个没有结果的，而且不被确认的一件事情，这个可能是天性的关系。可是穷理论刚才我看了一下，我觉得他几乎在每一个方面回答了我这个问题，就是我长期的，我不知道他们两位怎么看，但在我看来，就是他为这个理论和理论之间的那个很暧昧的空间，就是很明确的说出了一个要求，就是我们得有新的说法，我们得看一看我们视线以外的很多东西，
Okay, the question was really related to what he had said earlier about, he said, had I known the poor theory years ago, I would have gone more wild and more confident in myself. And the answer was, I think, when I was in New York, for example, with Liu Dan or Sola, there were really very limited opportunities for us, and just being the only one out there, there is a feeling of loneliness. But just going through the poor theory, I think there's a very good fit with what I had has proven what I have been suspecting, because what we have been, well, personally, what I have been doing does not quite fit into the common establishment or framework, but I think the poor theory has in a lot of ways answered my questions I've had for many years. That's speaking from my personal experience.
刚才有很多好几位同学都问我，为什么我的画在纽约也是不正确的？我想你还在画画就是不正确的，因为这是一件19世纪以前的事情，你必须用新的材料来做。第二，你还在画画，而且还画这么传统的一种写实的具象的绘画，那更是不准确的。所以我在材料和图像上就已经不正确啊。 我想他们会道德上肯定这些话，但是他在文化上他不会接受这些东西，至少是到目前为止，欧洲好一点。
During the tea break, many students asked me why would I be so politically incorrect in New York, the kind of work I do. My answer was, first of all, the act of painting itself was not politically correct because painting belongs to something before the 19th century. So you would really have to work with completely different materials. And the way I was painting was all realistic, so that was not politically correct. So I think morally they would support me, but culturally it was definitely not correct.
这就是为什么我说猖狂的原因，因为你在做一件不能被接受的事情的时候，其实你有挑衅感啊，至少我的性格是这样。这个，这是我要的结果。
That's why I said I would have been more wild because I was doing something that's not accepted by the common establishment, and I really enjoyed challenging what was out there.
Thank you.
In New York in the 80s, there was this group called appropriationists that you may have met or known of, like as Sherry Levine and Richard Petitbon. And actually, your series of works called Book Still Lives, is it true? The Book Still Life, which are the repaintings.
Yeah, book as a still life, right,
yes,
right, right.
Book as
Yes,
still lives,
yes.
right. Actually remind me a little bit of them since, for instance, Sherry Levine, she was reproducing by hand, like handmade reproductions taken out of books.
Mm-hmm.
But she was also reproducing the default of color, and she was also keeping the size of the reproduction on the book. So she was never like as a copyist in a museum, for instance, in front of the real image, but actually getting a picture out of a picture and keeping the size of the book itself. And I was wondering if you, and of course, she, as a female artist, she wanted to assert a certain identity within this.
Would you say that name again? The woman?
Sherry Levine.
Sherry Levine.
Sherry Levine, or Richard Petitbon, or
I see.
Philippe Taff, or Hélène Sturtevant.
Oh, yeah. What I should tell you is actually New York is my great teacher. I can paint like Tiananmen Square series and paint the book as life. Still life, all because influence from New York. New York gave me a lot of inspiration and the courage to do something I'm not very sure. Yeah, and you can tell any artists in my book the influence they give to me. Sometimes I cannot mention who they are. I think like Andy Warhol also is my great teacher. He tell me you can paint something made already, or something like that.
And my second question was actually how your copy making or your use of copy is within a Chinese tradition.
Yes, that's also excellent. Once I went the countryside, the people let me paint something. I don't know, at that time, I have long time not been China in the countryside. I said, I don't know what I should paint. If you have some book you give to me, I can paint that book. Because just that year, I started the book as a still life series. Then he only have one book. It's from Taipei, Forbidden City, the museum. Some Chinese tradition landscape. So I tried to paint that book. Then figure out the oil painting can do something like that. So it's the accident. So by the other reason is I copy so many different Western masterpieces or Chinese Ming Dynasty. The masterpiece is I always feel I'm student. I'm trying to learning the masterpiece. So when I copy, I don't worry. That's not my work. I feel so happy. but it's I sign my own name on it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I saw some on top of the pages of the paintings that you reproduce, there is often like a money bill reproduced on top of the pages.
Oh yes. That's a bad idea. You know, at the beginning, you're not very sure. Only the book, that's the painting, that's the work. So I try to put something there. I put money because they have they always a print, and sometimes their color similar. I need some between similar and contrasts. So I try. Then later I give up this idea. So later work, a few years later, my still life work more simple.
More abstract.
I don't know abstract or not. Yeah.
所以我也用中文问了。对，我看您那一套关于天安门的绘画，因为之前你们有谈论到关于这个时间和空间的这种 dislocation，包括您在纽约来画发生在天安门的事情，包括您的绘画中会有，比如说关于在美国的
经验，
像黑白的老照片一样的，还有关于在中国的天安门发生的事情，然后这就是好多层次的这种时间和空间的一致的 dislocation，然后就说好像，但是他们之间有一些东西是相通的，比如一种 trauma， 就是这种伤痕，或者一种很颓废、很绝望的情绪，然后我想问您的是。是不是您那个时候有对描述人的身体和人的面部表情有很大的兴趣？因为我觉得在很多绘画中，背景并不是非常重要的，而人的这个 body language 和 facial expression 是更为重要的。就那个时期，您为什么会特别关注这些元素？有没有什么样的 影响什么样的想法？我
告诉你，这全部是因为共产党的教育。我还是共产党的孩子，因为我们一直被告诉你要画英雄，要画伟大的事情，要画历史，要画，实际上就是要画悲剧。我现在回想起来，我们小时候看的共产党的电影全部是暴力，就是一个人把另一个人打死，然后我们在底下鼓掌，所以我相信我很小受了一种视觉上的暴力教育和一种英雄式的教育。 当然每个人性格不一样，有些画家文革一结束再也不喜欢画这些东西，他去画非常私人的、非常文雅的东西。但像我这样的性格，我会追踪这种感觉，所以我自己也有点惊讶。等6四发生的时候，实际上作为一个中国人，我非常非常愤怒难过。但是作为一个画家，我非常高兴，就是他给我送来一个绝妙的机会，就是我又可以画那些 非常 struggle， 非常暴力，非常惨的，很强烈的画面所以这个跟苏联的教育、跟党的教育、跟那段历史的教育都有关系我想通过这些话把这种教育肯定下来
问题是你自己再重复，还是我帮你说一遍？好吧 ，OK。 in your Tiananmen series of paintings, we see a clear dislocation in terms of time and space, and I see your U.S. experience. Some are like old photos, like just different layers of experience. And what I found interesting was that you were not paying as much attention to the background as to the facial expressions or the exaggerated gestures of the characters, and I want to know how is that? The answer was that I think it's still part of the communist education, in which we were always given a education on heroism and just how to present tragedy, and the movies we watched was pretty much just one killing another, like in terms of visual violence. So after the Cultural Revolution ended, many of the painters started to do something different, something very private, very elegant. But for me, somehow, I just followed through. And I think the June 4th incident made me very sad for what had happened to the people. But as an artist, I think secretly I was, in a sense, very happy because I finally found a good subject matter to follow through, to demonstrate my communist or Soviet Union education, so to speak.
I have two questions. First is a follow-up of my friend Ling's question. So you were talking about the creation of the three painting juxtaposition, that series came from your experience of visual dislocation or visual disorientation. Although you mentioned it might be a very ineffable experience, but I'm still curious from that striking experience to the final, production of the work, what kind of process you went through, if you can put that into words a little bit. My second question actually goes to Professor Abbas, because Chen Danqing Lao Shi describes his work as both politically incorrect in China and in the West. So I'm just curious, what about this politically incorrect work immediately drew your attention to, put in support into his book? Do I need to translate into Chinese or no?
Images.
Then something mentioned me the June 4th massacres, the image. So I just very strong urge to try to paint both, all three, try to put them together. Let's see how it looks. That's the 就动机怎么讲?
The motive.
The motive, yeah, for me. So, 第一次这么画了以后就来劲了，就发现可以第二次、第三次这样去做，因为你可以找到很多图片，试着把6色的图片放在一起。当然，并不是所有图片都能放在一起，但等我找到的时候，然后又把它画出来，这个时候很开心，因为你会发现这么不相干的图片和画面，它有理由变成一个整体放在一起看，而且最后你没法从里面找出一个结论啊。
It was at the beginning I pretty much stumbled upon some images or printed images that really reminded me of the June 4th massacre. So I just tentatively I tried to put them together, and once I put them together, I found it very interesting. And for the second and third time, I just found it more and more interesting. Just putting all these irrelevant images, for some reason they were put together, and it was very difficult to draw any conclusion out of it. And in that, I found some tension, something very interesting in there.
So the only things have never have answer until now to me is why I can mention the other picture from this picture. For example, my last huge piece about June 4th Tiananmen series is the beautiful photo about June 5th. Some tank being burned, then some bicycle on the tank. Yeah, it's beautiful photo put there. Then from this photo, I mentioned another few photo I saw on the art magazine. It's also beautiful installation work from different biennial show, like Venice Biennial or the Whitney Biennial, even documentary exhibition. So I cannot tell me why I can mention the other installation work, or I painted the other installation work can be put together with the tank and a bicycle. Because tank and a bicycle, it's not artwork, but the other is artwork. But I should try to show I don't understand this work. Actually, I really don't understand, but I just look at the surface. Every picture is beautiful. And every picture, just the things in the picture, put it away, it should not be put like that way, you know. So that's most of the things interesting me. It's cannot answer. There are no answer, but they catch my attention, and even I think it's beautiful. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
I think two quick answers. One is that I don't think we ever know why we like something. I mean, you like something first, and then you find a reason for it afterwards, right? It's always retroactive explanation. So there's something there that attracts me, right? So if I were to try and find an explanation now, I would say that it's probably this distinction between what I would call the literal and the literal-minded. I mean, the literal is very interesting. I mean, the literal, like something that's just there, and that you still haven't got an explanation for, like a newspaper photograph, for example, which is very literal, that has not been interpreted, maybe cannot be interpreted. That is very challenging, right? The literal-minded, and I think we have to make a very clear distinction between it. A literal-mindedness is giving a fairly ready-made explanation. Right? If you're literal-minded, it's like you go for the obvious interpretations, and that's literal-mindedness. I think what Danqing's work challenges us with would be exactly this. Right? It looks at a literal-minded person would say, this is just copy. Right? This is just stuff that's already there. But the literal, and the way the literal can also be juxtaposed with each other, now that's something very different.
Okay.
It's just a response, okay. 我说中文吧，就是我本来不想说，就是跟那个学术无关，就是刚才讨论到 different generation 的问题。然后我是代表80后吧，我想说一说，我觉得。就我自己不是共产党员，我是北大的学生，但是我觉得我可以提供一个反例，就并不是像您刚才说的那个很 sexy 的 model， 他就我一直也是就是能够得到最好的机会，但并不是因为是党员，就是我觉得我们这一代还是可以有自我选择的机会的，有不同的选择机会，我们也有自己的自主性，然后再就是我想可能这是不同的代之间的。就是不同点吧，也许我们这一代就是并没有像你们那一代那样，就是有很宏大的，就是说出来的很宏大的理想，但是我们可能也是在脚踏实地的做我们自己的事情，然后举一个小小的例子，比如说像这个今年是20周年那个64的那个纪念，然后当时就是有西方的记者来那个就在校门口采访学生，采访北大的学生，那有一个记者就逮住了一个北大学生，就问他，然后他说：“你对这个64有什么看法？”他就说：“64啊，那时候我还很小呢。”然后那个记者又问：“那你对民主有什么看法？”那学生就说：“民主是一个好东西。”那这个回答，也许会觉得说，我们这一代是对64很淡漠了，对那些记忆很淡漠，其实并不是的，只是。我们知道，因为他是一个西方的记者，他想要得到的回答是什么样的，对，但是并不想给你这样的回答，所以我觉得就是他那里头还是有一些机智的东西在里面，也有我们自己这一代的态度在里面的。
你觉得要请他把这个话翻译给大家听吗？我很高兴听到你这么说。
好，那你帮我翻译吧，我可能不记得我说了什么。
很好，我回头再跟你。
Okay, my comment is not related to art, but rather on your comment on the post-80s generation. Because personally, I'm a student from Beijing University, and I feel that it's not what you just said. It's not quite 100% so, because I think this generation have our own opportunities to make our own choices in life. There are, of course, these intergenerational differences. We may not have our grand ideals or goals in life, but we do have our own wit or attitude. For example, and I want to give an example, like just not very long ago, there were some Western reporters outside of Beijing University asking us about the June 4th incident. They asked us, what do you think about the June 4th? One of our students said, well, I was really small at that time, so I don't really know. And then he said, what do you think about democracy? The student just said, well, democracy is a good thing. The reason we said this, because we knew that the Western reporter was aiming at something, looking for some kind of an answer. And in our kind of answer, I think there is our own attitude in there, although a lot of that was not spoken.
Yeah, 我可以用英文回答吗？这个比较简单，我希望能够。Yeah, I'm very happy here. You say that. That mentioned it's very dangerous and things to describe the generation. You have to be careful. If my describe give the wrong impression, is that all the 80后 or all wanted to be the party member. I'm sorry about that. Actually, I can give you a lot of the sample. The 80后 is completely different. I think more sophisticated than 70后 than us. Here is the sample. Is in Beijing, I always have a chance to give speech at the different university. Each time, at least have one 80后, or a girl or a boy, they will stand up just asking me, Chen, how do you think the Tiananmen Square events? So I always answer them. I said, this is not the right place to talk this. It's been not allowed to talk. But thank you to remember this and mention this. But in this year, for 20 years memory for the June 4th massacre, I just speak in some university in the June 1st. Yeah, I speak. Then a young boy, just born at 1989, he stand up. He said, Chen, just tell me, how do you think about the things, the tragedy that happened 20 years ago? I say the same words to him. I say, I thank you. I'm respect you mentioned this today, but I cannot talk in this room because a few hundred young students there. So half student just doing this for this boy. Then he angry to me. He say, I know what's happened 20 years ago. I can see everything on the internet. So I just wanted to know and let you tell me, how do you think? So that's also 80后. So I like to tell you, to share the impression I from the young people. Thank you. 80后 is
the people born in the 80s.
David?
Thank you very much for a rich afternoon. I just want to bring us back explicitly to the way in which you richly used the notion of design in your comments. So there are various kinds of designers. There's a status designer, there are large political figures like Mao and Deng Xiaoping as designers. There's, in a sense, oneself as designer, right, when he's designing oneself. And then there are different versions of design. There's the design, and as Akbar reminded us early on, there's a design of history, and there are the designs of history. There's a kind of designer self-making. So I guess perhaps this is less a question than it is a kind of reminder to ourselves that and in a way your work is a reminder of this. I mean, this sort of play between, as you put it in your talk, socialist the impact of socialist realism on you, and then the shift to what you marked as Western art, which could be anything from Caravaggio through Warhol, right? Which are clearly there. That in that kind of Foucauldian self-making, it's never in the abstract, but it's always a drawing on of the impacts and influences that one's historical context and positioning provides one with, and then it's what one makes of it that is also a design, or indeed, as you put it, a counter-design. So I'm interested, if there were time, but certainly maybe in the ongoing discussion, to register the registers of design that you're drawing our attention to.
Thank you. Thank you, your words.
Okay. If we have time, I have a very brief question that perhaps can give you the last word. After. I was intrigued by one remark you made in response to a question was that the most important thing for you is you come always back to the impossibility of communication. And at the same time, you had this excitement about pure theory and said, oh my God, if I had known it when I was in New York, I would have been more courageous and I would have been able to do more with it. But now we are still in a very productive time, and I want to encourage you to think about, do you have any idea how you could use it today, and is perhaps what you call the impossibility of communication a kind of starting point for pure theory and for working with and through pure theory?
对，这个有意思it's very very good question. 我想我们当然都不是理论家，但是实际上像这样一种创作，非常连自己都不确定的一种创作，它本身已经可以追认为是一种穷理论的一种走投无路的情况。走投无路的时候，其实意味着你在找路，你在找路。就是说找的时候，那个路出现了，但是大家不觉得那个是路。但是你的作品会说，这会在一个对的时候，或者在一个。你可能幸运会等到一个时候说这可能是一条路，至少它有这个印记在这个上面，所以我喜欢这种走投无路的情况，我确实走投无路，现在我索性就停下来，但是我想这个会议会给我一个可能，就是它至少让我多了2个词，这2个词在我画画的时候可能会妨碍我，但是当我这些话已经出来的时候，这2个词，让我就是有了武器，可能去重新把这些东西拨开来看一看，它是不是这个意思啊？当然，我相信穷理论有一天，如果它非常丰富以后，它一定又在期待新的穷的理论。我不知道，它是一个过程，它不会停下来。
I think it's a very interesting question because personally I'm not a theorist, and a lot of times I am not certain about what I'm doing, and in the work I'm doing or currently, I think I come across a dead end. Of course, we're constantly searching for the right path to follow. Sometimes you may think it's a dead end, then it may come out as the right path eventually. So I think currently maybe my creative work, the process may be challenged, but once if something comes out, this poor theory may be helpful. And of course, the theory would go on to be enriched, and in the future there may be just another poor theory that comes with it.
Okay, I think on that note, we can thank Chen Danqing for a very stimulating discussion.